Those of you who are watching, my name is Dave Schroeder. This is Aaron Armstrong, the said author tonight. This is going to be a little bit different, maybe a little bit less professional, but we're going to have fun. I'm looking at Eric Rossett over here. We're going to give a shout out to his podcast, Books of Titans. This guy is like a real reader, by the way. He is reading all the great books right now, starting with the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Does that mean that I made a mistake by asking you to be my co-host on a podcast all those years ago?
All these years ago.
All right.
We were always watching Eric because we thought what he was doing is better.
Oh, okay.
But we just didn't want to admit it.
That's true.
Yeah, so this is what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's fine.
Is it fine?
Sure.
Okay. Well, we have a resident immigrant here, our Canadian, Aaron Armstrong, who's written a little book today.
It's true. It is, in fact, little. It's, it's 168 pages, so it's nice and accessible.
So it's for people who love reading as well as who don't read good.
Yes. Yes. But it's perfect for libraries that are scale size, that are built to scale.
Okay.
So that ants can fit in. It's just fine.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Well, Aaron, why don't you tell us a little bit about the book? I want to give everyone just a little overview about what it is, what you have wanted to do, basically why it exists.
Yeah. So the book that we're talking about today is called "I'm a Christian, Now What?" A guide to your new life with Christ. And so for those who are in the building, of course, it is available here in the store today, which buy 10 if you can. I would love that very much, as would my publisher. But and all of you online, you should also buy it from Landmark's store online too. So there we go.
That was good.
Thank you.
That was a good pitch.
Perfectly natural.
So we know where we are now,
Absolutely.
Basically.
That's right.
And for all the very confused people in here, we are recording this as a podcast
That's
as
right.
well. So
this is going to be extra weird. So thank you for not worrying about any sort of permissions or anything like that. Your presence is your present to me and your permission for us. But anyway, so the book itself is the story behind this book is that I became a Christian in the year 2005. I was 25 going on 26. Didn't grow up in with any sort of real faith background whatsoever. Although apparently I went to a Sunday school program a couple of times when I was like 6 or something like that in a small town in Alberta. So that's also in Canada for the geographically challenged.
The Great White North. Very, very much.
That's
yes.
right. That's right. So, anyway, became a Christian in 2005, and the first thing I asked my now wife Emily, who is here with me tonight, was this all important question: now what? What on earth are we supposed to do now that we're Christians? Because she became a Christian 12 seconds before I did. And so we had to figure out a lot of different stuff because, we had been, your pretty typical North American non-Christian couple. We had all the trappings of marriage before we were married. We owned a house. We had a car that we leased together. We had a shared bank account. We worked at the same company. We did all of these kinds of things. We were not married. Pretty common stuff for most people these days, but we later realized had some complexities there. So that was one thing. We had questions about, okay, what does this mean for where we go to church? What does it mean for how we do this whole having a relationship with God thing? How do we read the Bible? How do we pray? How does it relate to how I read and listen to music and and movies and all of these kinds of things? How do I engage with big social issues as a Christian as well? And how do I fight well?
Mm-hmm.
And so that one's a really tricky one. But
not with me, but
I mean, I never fight with you.
Okay.
No.
Right. Good.
No, we're good. We're good.
I'm feeling it.
Yeah.
There you go. Right.
Yeah. So, Dave, that's kind of the big story behind that's what led down the process to this. But in that, figuring all of that out, figuring that mess out led to was really, really messy and kind of staggering and falling over and running into walls as we went along, and Emily being significantly more patient with me than I deserved through most of it. And so around 8 years ago in 2015, was coming up on 10 years of being a Christian, and I started thinking back, because I sometimes get a little bit introspective or navel-gazy around timestamps with a 5 or a 0 at the end, and so watch out for my 45th birthday, because that's gonna be rough. But with that, I started thinking about, okay, these were all the things that happened. These were places where, yes, I had some wins, but these are also some areas like, man, I wish I could have done this better. Like, honestly, leaving the first church that we were a part of, I could have done such a better job of, and just did not. And a whole bunch of other stuff too. And so, since we are all finite beings, we are linear beings, we exist within one single space and time. I can't go back in time and talk to 25-year-old me and slap him. But what I can do instead is encourage someone who's in the same boat that I was in at that age and at that stage in my faith, and say, okay, gal, this is going to be tricky, but it's going to be okay. And so here's some of the stuff that I walk through. Here's some questions you might have. Let's walk through that together. And so, and that ultimately is what became this book.
Okay. Yeah. So a lot of what you're referring to, it sounded like a very weird experience, especially coming as an adult.
Yeah.
Finding God, and at the same time, then trying to figure out, again, the point of the book.
Yeah.
What do I do with this? So when that happens, like, how do you take those next steps? How did you take those next steps? And you indicated like there's things that didn't go as how you'd hoped, but like, how would you tell someone else going through something as today, saying like, does it have to be this weird Christianity in general, following Jesus? Like, what would you tell that person?
Well, I mean, there's a degree to which, like, I'll back up and just say, like, if you don't have people in your life already who are Christians, it's going to be a little bit harder than if you do. We were very fortunate that we had a college friend named Adam who became a Christian a couple of years before we did. And he's actually the one who invited us to a program at his church, which ultimately led to this whole us being here thing, and talking about this right now. But with that, you need to have people around you, and you need to have people who can ask questions about, hey, what's going on? How are you doing today? And so this is where immediately having some kind of church is really, really helpful. And so whatever that looks like, the first church that we were a part of was really good for us for our first couple of years. And they were very kind and very patient. The pastor was probably way more patient with us on a number of things than he should have been. But he was also flying by the seat of his pants at a very particular time when God was doing something very unusual, and a whole bunch of 20-somethings who were all living and sleeping together all became Christians all at the same time. But not all of them, literally, not weird. So that sounded really strange. So, but it is Canada, so you never know. Anyway, so I think some of the things that I would start with would be like, okay, so let's just acknowledge the fact that Christianity is kind of weird. I mean, think about it. We read a book on a regular basis that is thousands of years old. that we come to expecting to hear from the creator of the universe. Mm-hmm. And what's more is that we actually do. That is weird, but it's cool. We not only do we come to a book expecting to hear from him, but we can talk to him with our words, with our thoughts, with our pens, all of these different ways, and we call that prayer. That's a bit unusual too. We also, this God that we communicate with and we build a relationship with also exists outside of space and time, and yet also is actively engaged within space and time. And not only is engaged with it, but also entered into it as and became one of us. That's super weird. It's the kind of weird that is so weird it can only be true. And so that is one of the things and so we have to acknowledge those things. And yeah, we can get into some other things that are kind of peculiar. I mean, but in a lot of those instances, it just ends up being kind of making fun of Christian culture stuff. And that's not really necessary. You'll get enough of that in time, and it's okay. And we all do it among friends, especially about songs, but, and maybe movies. But so you're going to want to start with say, okay, so we read the Bible. So we start with acknowledging the weirdness. Then we can start talking about, okay, here's what it actually means to be a Christian too. That if you are a Christian, you're actually a new person. Yeah, you look the same. You have the same mannerisms, generally speaking. You say a lot of you have the same mouth and language and vocabulary and all this kind of stuff. But internally, there has been a change in you. And so you have new desires. You have a new mindset. You have a new purpose. You have a new hope that you didn't have before. Mm-hmm. And basically the rest of your life is working all of those things out. Mm-hmm. And so that starts with, and that comes down to everything from learning the basic mechanics of how you do faith with reading your Bible, praying, being in relationship with other Christians, down to how do you interact with the world around you. Mm-hmm.
Good. Aaron, I became a Christian in the 90s when you were told after you come to know Jesus that it's time to crush your Pearl Jam, Nirvana, Metallica Black Album.
Man, I'm so sorry. So it's going to be okay because you had to buy those twice.
I wised up and they remained intact.
Oh,
but,
good.
My point is, for someone who does come to know Jesus, what do you tell them about how to look at culture today and how to appreciate music, books, and we'll get to that a little bit more in a second. But what would you tell that person?
Well, that's a really good thing. I mean, I think one of the first things that we need to do, and we need to do a really good job of this as, within the church, and it's a place where we have kind of fallen down on and off, is that we need to relearn the truth that creativity comes from God in every form, in every fashion. God himself created the most amazing thing ever, which is the entire universe. It is spectacularly interesting. We get evidence of this over and over and over and over again as we develop new technology that lets us see more and more cool things. And I mean, you look at the Webb telescope images, it's like, this stuff is mind blowing. Mm-hmm. It's awesome. Yeah. You see that you see instances of the first musicians already in scripture, that people naturally started gravitating towards all this kind of stuff. We don't need to fear creativity. We don't need to be ashamed of creativity. We need to embrace creativity. Mm-hmm. As Christians, one of the things that we need to especially do is we need to embrace the really kind of the rubric of the goodness, truth, and beauty. And so this idea that like we can look at everything and we can see, okay, what is actually beautiful in this? And like, because you can see beauty even in like some pretty dark stuff. Like, you on the live stream, you can't see this, but right in front of me is a book called Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, which is a Southern Gothic novel that I read in the mid 90s. And it's a weird book, man, but it's also beautifully written. It is spectacularly interesting because of that. But everything that we create as people, whether we're Christians or not, has an opportunity, like does in some way point us to goodness, beauty, and truth, whether that is in the sense of technical excellence and beauty, because of that, or that there's something that just because of us being made in the image and likeness of God, we can't help testify to those things in who we are. And so because of that, the content of what we write and sing and say and draw and all of these things all inevitably points us to some larger reality. I mean, unless it's with the possible exception of some Nine Inch Nails songs, I'll give that caveat.
With the ability to observe the beauty of how the universe works and so on, inevitably there are going to still be questions. How would you guide someone who, hey, they've come to accept Jesus in their life, but they still have questions or doubts or however you want to call them? What would you tell them? Well,
I mean, not to be afraid of them, I think is the first thing. There's a lot of room for questions in the Christian faith. We're intentionally not told everything that we want to know by God. And that's the key. Not what we want to know. There's lots of stuff that I want to know that I'm never going to get the answer to. Like, for example, why on earth The Bachelor is still on? I don't understand that.
We can watch together and,
No, we're not going to, Dave. No, it's not that kind of podcast. Or live stream.
Okay.
But what God tells us is what we need to know. And so we can't be frustrated. It's tempting to be frustrated when we come to the Bible, when we are working through the Christian experience, by those questions, if we're not given the right understanding of what to be looking for. The Bible gives us everything we need for a life of faith and godliness. So it tells us everything that we need to know to know Jesus and to live faithfully in obedience to him. It doesn't tell us doesn't tell us everything that is a mystery to us. And so we have to give room for those things, and we need to be humble and charitable and be okay with saying things like, I don't know. It's a great response to say, I don't know, if it's something that you don't know and you can't know. But you also encourage exploration and say, okay, but let's try to figure this out. Let's see where some other people have come to on these things and why, and wrestle with the implications of those. I mean, you think about debates about, how, anything, and that would take us way too long to get through. So let's keep going.
Well, I mentioned music before. You've got kind of a theme that you use throughout the book. So tell the people here a little bit about that.
Are we talking
music?
Oh, yeah. Don't listen to cheap imitations. Listen to good stuff instead. That one.
So you can have the freedom to
absolutely.
explore art.
Yeah, absolutely. So
and I'll kind of back it. Like for those, if you watched before, it was a few weeks ago. Russ Ramsey was in here with his book, Rembrandt is in the Wind. Wonderful
Yeah.
book. Highly recommend getting in here. But like, what I appreciate Russ walking us through is how to look at art
Yeah.
through new eyes, especially as a
Yeah.
Christian.
So
go deeper there.
So a lot of that has to do with I think the way I described it in the book is talking about calibrating your convictions. And so what that means is that all of us do have convictions. We have and so certain things at certain times may or may not be best for us where we're at. We think about music for a second. I listen to a lot of grumpy, sad, pretentious music as a teenager because I was grumpy, sad, and pretentious. And and I'm still mostly grumpy and sad and pretentious, but
Moody.
Moody. That's right. Okay. But I found that when I became a Christian, there was certain stuff that it just wasn't like, I listened to it and it just wasn't good for my heart and my mind at that particular time. And so I put some stuff on the shelf for a while. And eventually some of it I came back to. Some of it I was just like, nope, I'm all done with this. And some of it is still like, I could hear some of it and be like, that is technically excellent, and I just can't listen to it. And it's not a bad thing, but it's obey. So it's, as you calibrate your convictions, what that means is that you're taking you're thinking through what you're listening to, what you're watching, what you're doing, all that kind of stuff, through the lens of the Bible. And so that just takes time to do. And so you're taking your cultural assumptions and you're testing them against that. And both new Christians and established Christians who are helping them have to do both of those things. They have to do it at the same time because, certainly for a lot of mature or established Christians, people who've lived in and around the faith for a really long time, one of the difficulties is that there's a lot of added on baggage that gets thrown into stuff. So which is where you get a lot of the if you like the Foo Fighters, listen to this band that sounds kind of like them but isn't as good type of messaging that comes out of the Christian music industry. And sorry for anyone who likes those bands, but it's cool. But I had friends who would be like, "Oh, try this one," and so when we were new Christians, I'm like, "Oh, okay," and so I'd put it on. I played it a couple of times, and I'm like, "Oh, okay, cool." And then I went and I started listening to something good instead, because it was just, this was more enjoyable.
So are you saying that all Christian music is bad?
Not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all, because there is, I'm saying that genuinely good creative expression is genuinely good.
Yeah.
And so there is good creative expression made by Christians that is amazing. There are guys like, there are all kinds of guys who do fantastic work that is really, really solid, guys and gals. And there's also people who are Christians who make just things that are no.
Well, I'll play off. We're in a bookstore right now.
Yeah.
Which I think part of my journey has been discovering books that help me grow, help me think deeper.
Yeah.
For those of you who know, we co-hosted a books podcast for years. We loved
That's true.
kind of finding these kind of gems that are out there. But why don't you walk us through kind of, hey, what do you recommend for a Christian to read who may not be an overt Christian book?
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's always the fun thing is when it comes to stuff like that, I love going back to, I have to have a conversation with those people before I can really say for sure, because what I like to read and what someone else likes to read may not be the same thing, because I'm a weirdo and I read a lot of different things and a lot of things all at the same time. And so, but a book that I would go to right away would be something like, if someone is a little more literary minded, I'm going to go with like a Leif Enger book, because it's just beautifully written. It's thoughtful. It's, some of his books have overt,
And this is a novel.
aspects. Yes. Yeah. So he's got 3 novels under his own name so far. He writes one book like every 17,000 years, and it's great. And he's not that, and he's in his early 60s, something like that now. So it's impressive how he can take that much time. But his most recent book came out in 2018 called Virgil Wander, and it's fantastic because all of his books are about people, and that's all. And that's what's interesting about them. There's not they're not super plot driven, but they're interesting because of the characters. His brother also writes excellent novels, and his are a little bit darker. But he's got one that is actually a kind of meta reinterpretation of Hamlet that also involves Hamlet in it, called The Undiscovered Country, which is also a line from Hamlet. And it's amazing. And it's super dark. So I have to give that caveat. For someone who is interested in something a little more all ages friendly, a book like the whole series, really, the Wingfeather Saga by Andrew Peterson, is wonderful for all ages. And what I love about it is it's written with clearly deep theological convictions, with a deeply rooted Christian faith, but it doesn't read like a Christian fiction novel. It's just a good story. And good stories communicate some like always inevitably riff off of something that's happening that God has done, because we're all plagiarists in that sense. I'd also go with, if you're a little more heady and you like 19th century novels. I mean, I love Dickens. Great Expectations is one of my favorite books. Which is probably strange for some people, but it's, it's fine. I bought a copy of it when I was 17 for an independent study in English class in high school, and I have destroyed my copy with use. I still have that one copy that I have. I love Jane Austen as well. And so, again, staying in that kind of vein, I would definitely recommend a book like Emma or Sense and Sensibility, particularly because one of the key things that you need to understand about her is so much of her work is actually satire. And so the movies that are made always miss that, because they make them these serious romances, and it takes out all the fun. And so that's some of it too. And of course, there are great standbys like, The Hobbit, the whole Lord of the Rings trilogy. Those are, that might feel a little bit cliche for some of our crowd, but they're good stories, and they present a deep truth, and they don't do it by being cheesy or anything like that. Yeah. So those are a few. And then, for other folks, sometimes I just got to say, you got to read some Douglas Adams, a dude who did not in any way, shape, or form honor or respect or love the Lord Jesus, but man, he is a good, funny writer. But caveat, if you don't like British humor, you're not going to like his books.
Like it. Yeah.
So,
well, thank you for those recommendations.
You're welcome.
Great. Yeah. I mean, again, just proving the fact as you walk through, like, it's okay. We need to enjoy good things, and they may not come sometimes from a Christian, but artwork is often found ultimately coming from the Creator. And so
Yeah.
I think it's we were talking about Cormac McCarthy earlier. We don't know exactly where Cormac McCarthy stands in his faith, right? But I know so many Christians have been impacted by The Road, as an example,
Yeah.
because of the father-son relationship.
Yeah.
Okay, well, God can use so many different types of stories to
That's
do what He
right.
wants. So
That's right.
Before we close out, Aaron, one thing I love in the book, and I do encourage everyone to read it, pick up a copy, but you get very practical. I want you to give like one last kind of charge, like finding a church is weird. I think that's one of the strangest things. And I felt like when I was reading that chapter, I felt like, okay, if I was starting over again, trying to figure out where to find a church, what advice would you give them? Give us a good short version of that.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, here's what I'm going to say. There are, I think, 7 really good things to be looking for, 7 really important things to be after when you are looking for a healthy church. None of those have to do with any kind of amenities or music style or even quality of, although we should always be pursuing the best quality that we can within the means and abilities that we have. So there's my caveat. But those 7 are that Jesus is the focus of everything that we do. So right down to the music, the content of the music, to the content of our preaching, to why and how we celebrate things like communion or the Lord's Supper or however else you might describe it, depending on your tradition. But that you should be going in every single week expecting to hear about Jesus and not be hearing about whatever culture worry issue is going on at any particular moment. The second is that character in leadership is and in volunteers and in people is prioritized over skill. And so not that skill doesn't matter, but the thing that the Bible emphasizes more than anything else is the quality of a person's character. And so if a church is led by people who are above reproach, which is the overriding qualification for leadership in the Bible, that means that they are to have stellar character, that they are to that no one can point to a legitimate major fault. Doesn't mean they're perfect. Yeah. But it means they have a good reputation with people outside in the community as a whole. It means that they're not prone to love money or outbursts of anger. They're not narcissists. They're not abusive psychos. They're not any of the things you read about on the internet right now, which make me want to cry. And I don't feel feelings easily, so that says something. But that's all I need to say about that right now. The next one is that the Bible is the standard. And so it's the norm of the things that we do. That the people in the church, that there is a desire for people to be known. And so we take the time to create an environment, a culture where people can be known and people can feel safe bringing their junk. And we give as much time as people need for that to happen. And a big piece and a thing that goes along with that as well is that we take sin seriously. And so and especially big, serious sins that, involve people from, law enforcement.
Sure.
We have to take those things seriously, but we also take seriously things like gossip and, ongoing character flaws, but we don't just look at the surface and say, oh, someone is doing this all the time. It's like, okay, what's going on? What is if there's a gossip problem, it's like, okay, so let's figure out, okay, what's going on in the heart that's making someone want to gossip. If it's, but again, there's a whole lot of things that can be said there. Along with that non-Christians are loved. And so what that means is that we want to create an environment where someone who doesn't know anything about Christianity at all, that they're not completely clueless. It's not creating a an experience for them, but it's making the experience that is for Christians understandable to a non-Christian. And then finally, that compassion is a way of life. And so that's really important because we have a pendulum swing in the North American church, especially, where we get really excited about one thing and then we get really anti that thing really fast. And one of those big things is always seems to come back to justice and mercy in the world. And yet the church historically has been the standard bearer for the pursuit of justice and mercy for all and compassion for all people. I mean, considering that in the early, that was what won so many people to the faith in the first place, was how Christians cared for the sick, for the widows, for the orphans, for who brought in abandoned children into their families, who when the plagues hit, they were the ones who didn't leave town, but they stayed and they cared for people. This was such a priority for the church that in some of the in one of the early councils, they said outright that wherever a church is built, a hospital and a school needs to be built too. So that is what we need to be. That's what we need to be known for. We need to be known for both our proclamation of the gospel and also our demonstration of the fruit of the gospel. And if we are not, and we do that as compassionate people. And so if a church imperfectly in all of those things, of course, because we're gonna have strengths and weaknesses in those areas. But if we are pursuing those things, and if the church you're looking at is pursuing those things, then it's a good church to be at.
Yeah. That's a good way to end, Aaron. That was great. So one last thing, just as we end here, if anyone has any questions, here's what I would say, feel free. We're happy to answer right now. If not, we'll close off and we're going to be here for a while. Yeah, but anything else before we go?
Yeah.
From Canada, moving to a place like Tennessee.
Oh, that's different.
Basically, the first question anybody asks you when they meet you is, so where do you go to church?
Yeah.
You want to repeat it?
What's the experience like for you?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the question being, what is the experience like moving from a Canadian context to a very Christian wallpapery context like Tennessee? It was extreme culture shock for me, because I'm not used to seeing Bible verses all over the places and people and this veneer that covers a lot of the yuck that is pretty out in the open. But there's a thing that I appreciate that Flannery O'Connor once wrote about the South, and another Southern Gothic writer, so you can kind of tell. That's right. Kind of tell where I live. She described the South as not being Christ-centered, but as being Christ-haunted, a place where people don't so much believe that the gospel is true, but that they are afraid that it might be. And so that kind of, when I read that actually helped me understand what I was seeing and what I was experiencing, and that it's like, oh, okay, this is like, okay, we can work with this, and I can start to translate what's going on here, and realize that, and see that, this isn't like some bastion of last standing Christian culture or anything like that. It's a place that desperately needs Jesus too. It's just a place that happens to have a lot of churches. And so it just changes kind of where we focus, which is why I said earlier about we have to recalibrate our convictions on things based which means doing away with a lot of cultural stuff too. And it's harder for people here, I've noticed. So it's a good question. Did I answer that okay? Okay, awesome. Thank you. All right.
I haven't read your book yet, but I'm curious, like, what do you think is the one piece of advice in here that you most wish somebody would have shared with you in your early journey?
Ooh, that's a good one. There's so much of it. I think, honestly, I wish someone had been able to explain the concept of convictional kindness to me a lot sooner than I understood it.
Explain that a little bit
Okay,
more.
so basically it's the whole idea of embracing a lost virtue in society, so charity. That we can agree that we can disagree on how we express not just like both. So let me back this up. We can disagree on significant issues with non-Christians and with Christians as well, but we can also disagree with like-minded Christians about how we live out shared values and shared convictions, because we don't always do the same things. And I mean, you know, a great example of that is with how we think about how do we be a Christian, how do we be Christians in the public square. And so for a lot of people that immediately goes to things like politics. And as one who can't vote because not citizen ever, right? Well, not ever. I will be eventually.
Not yet.
Not yet. There's a lot of paperwork involved, and that makes me break out in hives. But we think that there's only one right way. And so we'll hear messages like there's only one right way to vote. There's only one right way to talk about issue X, Y, or Z. And there may actually be more ways to deal with those things. You know, education is another one of those things. It's like, you know, it's either you're schooling this way or this way, and and whatever side you're on, you're evil if you're denying the gospel if you don't do the one that I'm convinced is right. And those things are just not true. There's lots of good ways to do these. There's lots of valid ways. The question is what is our conviction? So the other thing, honestly, that I wish someone had said, though, that was something else, was I wish someone in our first church had given us an out for living in a compromised kind of way when we were new Christians. But no one did.
You mean like giving you an opportunity
So
to change where you're
So basically, I wish someone had been able to give one of us a room to stay in, at their house, rent free.
You're trying to make
Yeah.
ends meet.
Yeah. So,
Gotcha.
yep. So that's a key takeaway for all the people who are concerned about cohabitation. If we as Christians really, really care about stuff like that, we want to let's open up a guest room.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah.
Too, yeah.
Yeah,
Anything else before we end?
I think we got it.
All right.
All right.
Aaron.
Dave, this has been wonderful.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
You have a book.
I do. I have a book.
I'm a Christian, now what?
A Guide to Your New Life with Christ.
Landmark Booksellers. Thank you guys for
Yes,
having
thank
us.
you.
We really appreciate it.
And thanks all for coming out.
Thank you.